As the sun slipped gently beneath the edge of the horizon, a soft hush would settle across the medieval countryside. Fields grew quiet. The bleating of sheep slowed, and the distant hum of wheels on dirt roads became a rare sound. Villages, often, little more than clusters of timber-framed cottages nestled beside winding streams, began their gentle descent into the deep folds of the night. In an age without electric light, darkness was not merely an absence, it was a presence. The onset of twilight brought with it a tender stillness, and for most, this was the signal to wind down. Yet, contrary to modern assumptions of single, uninterrupted slumber, the medieval night was anything but monotonous. Let us first step into a small English hamlet around the year 1250. Here, families lived together in single-room homes, where livestock might sleep just a few feet from the children. Beds were made of straw stuffed into linen sacks, or if one was lucky, with a modest mattress of hay resting on wooden slats. Blankets were woven of wool, coarse but warming, while the wealthiest might enjoy coverings of furs. The notion of privacy was foreign. Entire households slept together. Grandparents, children, parents, and sometimes visiting kin. Bodies nestled close for warmth through the long winter nights. Stories were shared softly, secrets exchanged, and prayers whispered before eyes fluttered shut. But this first descent into sleep, called the first sleep, or primo somno, was only the beginning of the night's quiet ritual. Typically beginning. Shortly after sundown, around 8 or 9 p.m., this first sleep would last for several hours. During these hours, dreams often stirred gently, as if the soul dipped its toes into another realm. After some time, perhaps around midnight, something curious happened. People would awaken, not in a jarring, hurried way, but in a calm, almost expected intermission. This period between first and second sleep was known across Europe. Records from England, France, and even Italy mention it. It was not seen as insomnia, but a part of natural human rest. What one did in this time varied greatly. Some would use it to pray, reciting verses under their breath by candlelight. Religious devotion held a special place in medieval hearts, and the stillness of night was a sacred hour for reflection. Others might use the time more intimately, couples quietly reuniting beneath the heavy quilts before drifting once more into slumber. Farmers might stir to check on animals or tend to small chores. Some even used this window to write, read if literate, or engage in quiet conversation. There was no rush. The second sleep would come naturally, often after an hour or two. Why this rhythm? Without artificial light, melatonin levels, the body's natural sleep hormone, remained largely unbroken by bright stimuli. This allowed the body to follow its innate pattern: sleep, wake, sleep again. Today, sleep researchers suggest this might be our natural design, disrupted only in the last 2 centuries by industrial lighting and changing work schedules. The evening itself, before first sleep, was also a slow dance of rituals. Supper, the final meal of the day, was taken before sunset. Meats, pottage, bread, and perhaps a bit of ale. Conversation was gentle. Laughter was soft. There were no screens or broadcasts, only flickering flames casting shadows on wooden walls. Once the fire was banked for safety, embers tucked under ash to keep warmth for the morning, the family would prepare for bed. Washing was minimal, often just a splash of cold water from the basin. Clothes might not change. Many slept in their daywear or simple linen smocks. Only the wealthiest had designated night clothes, and even then, they resembled long tunics more than pajamas. The quiet of the medieval night was interrupted only by the distant howl of wolves, the hoot of owls, or the clatter of hooves from a late travelling rider. Bells from a monastery might toll the hours for monks keeping vigil, while in towns, night watchmen patrolled, their lanterns glowing dimly in the fog. Candles, made of tallow or beeswax, were precious. Most were extinguished quickly to save them. Fire was both light and danger. Many towns were reduced to ash by nighttime blazes. As such, evenings were brief, and early sleep was common. The medieval world, in all its simplicity, found rest not in hurried slumber, but in measured calm. The dual sleep pattern reflects a life more in tune with natural rhythms, where the night was not a block of unconsciousness, but a time for sacred pause, quiet communion, and restoration. The story of medieval sleep begins here, in this quiet fold between twilight and dawn, where sleep came gently and the night whispered secrets beneath thatched roofs and star-strewn skies. As the village lay under a blanket of stars and frost began to form on windows of horn or oiled cloth, a gentle stirring marked the midpoint of night. In the world of the Middle Ages, this was not a strange hour. Quite the opposite. It was expected, anticipated, and sometimes even cherished. Known as the watch, or more simply the wake, this quiet segment between the first and second sleep held a deep place in medieval hearts. When eyes reopened in the pitch of night, it was not greeted with annoyance or fear. It was a time set apart from labor and obligation, where one's thoughts could flow unhurried. This wakeful interval, perhaps lasting from an hour to nearly 2, invited a kind of twilight consciousness. Sleep had loosened the soul's hold on the day, and yet the body remained still and warm beneath heavy blankets. This in-between time, though bodily awake, was often dreamlike in spirit. It was during these hours that dreams were remembered most vividly. The medieval mind was deeply attuned to the world of dreams. They were not seen as idle imaginings, but as messages. Some believed they came from angels, others from demons, and still others saw them as whispers of truth from within the soul. Books such as The Dream of Scipio and The Consolation of Philosophy were read by educated clergy and noblemen, delving into the meanings behind the visions of sleep. Meanwhile, common folk passed on oral wisdom, warnings about dreams of falling teeth, said to foretell death, or dreams of water, said to portend birth or cleansing. Midnight, to many, was also a sacred time for prayer. In monasteries, the monks of Cluny or Cistercian orders would rise for matins, the first of the 8 daily canonical hours. They chanted in dark chapels by candlelight, their voices rising like mist into the cold stone vaults above. But outside, the cloistered world, in cottages and keeps. This same hour might see a father stirring the coals for warmth, a mother checking on a restless child, or a couple murmuring together beneath the firs. It was a time of intimacy, not only of bodies but of hearts and minds. It was also the hour when, according to many beliefs, the veil between the worlds grew thinnest. Superstition was no stranger to the medieval home. People believed that spirits, both benign and malevolent, were most active during these liminal times. The witching hour, often thought to be around 3 a.m., was associated with unnatural stirrings. Ghosts, it was whispered, walked the earth when the church bells did not ring. To guard against such things, protective charms were placed above doors, under pillows, or etched into wooden bedposts. Prayers to Saint Michael or the Virgin Mary were whispered. In some places, a simple iron nail driven into the wall near the bed was believed to ward off night demons. Not all spirits were feared. Ancestors were thought to visit during certain feast nights, such as All Hallows' Eve. During the midnight hours, one might even speak softly to a lost loved one, asking for guidance, forgiveness, or simply to feel less alone. In this blend of the sacred and the spectral, the medieval night took on a life of its own. It is said that King Henry I of England, though a man of great power, followed the 2-sleep pattern and often read scripture or dictated letters during the watch. Elsewhere, monks compiled their best theological thoughts in the quiet between sleeps, inspired by the stillness of the hour. This period was a gift of time. In a world where labor consumed daylight hours and early sleep was necessary for early rising, the watch offered a rare window for personal thought. It was here that peasants might mend garments, that scribes might compose poems, and that couples might speak freely without interruption. The body, refreshed slightly by the first sleep, remained restful but alert. It was not an anxious wakefulness, but one embraced with ease and familiarity. As the hours passed, weariness would return like a gentle tide. The warmth of the bed, the flickering of a dying flame, the rhythmic breathing of others in the room. These called the sleeper back to rest. The second sleep was said to be deeper, richer. Some described it as dreamless, a true surrender. Others believed this sleep brought visions that reached beyond this world. In either case, it typically lasted until dawn, ending with the crow of roosters or the soft tolling of the church bell. And so, the night passed not as a single march of hours, but as a quiet journey of phases, a descent, a pause, a return. In the darkness, 1,000 small acts unfolded. Whispered prayers, secret hopes, remembered dreams, and tender moments of connection. This watch between sleeps was not empty time, but a soulful chamber in the medieval rhythm of life. As we drift further into the tapestry of their nocturnal world, let us carry forward this sense of wonder. For in the stillness of their nights, the people of the Middle Ages found not silence, but presence. When we think of rest, we often imagine solitude, quiet chambers, drawn curtains, and silence. But in the Middle Ages, sleep was a communal affair, and not only among people. Within the dim hearth-lit spaces of medieval homes, animals shared, the night with their human caretakers, curled beside them in warmth and quiet companionship. Let us imagine again a small timber cottage along a forest's edge. The sun has long since sunk beneath the hills, and the household has gathered for the evening meal. Bread, perhaps still warm from the communal oven, is torn and dipped into thick broth. After supper, the room quiets. Coals in the hearth flicker their final dance. Children are nestled in corners, and the heavy woolen blankets are unrolled upon the straw pallets. But alongside them, snuffling softly in sleep, lie animals, chickens roosting on a perch near the wall, a goat tethered gently at the far side of the room, a dog curled close to the feet of its master. In wealthier homes, cats stalk the shadows, keeping watch for mice and the occasional rat. Even pigs, in colder regions, were sometimes brought indoors to preserve their warmth and protect them from thieves or wolves. This closeness between man and beast was born not only of necessity, but of kinship. The barn was not always a separate structure. Often, it was built as an extension of the home, under the same roof, separated only by a low wall or partition. In Alpine and Scandinavian regions, longhouses were designed specifically for shared warmth. Humans at one end, animals at the other, their body heat mingling in the bitter cold of winter. There was a deep comfort in this closeness. The soft rustle of feathers, the gentle bleating of a lamb, the steady breathing of a cow. These were not disturbances, but lullabies. They grounded the night, filled it with life, and reminded each sleeper that they were not alone. The medieval worldview saw animals not as objects, but as creatures with souls, emotions, and roles within the great order of creation. Dogs especially were beloved. They guarded the home, herded sheep, and served as loyal companions. It was not uncommon for a dog to share a bed, especially with children, their warmth a gentle shield against the chill. Cats, too, held their place in the night. In some regions they were revered, symbols of domesticity and protectors of the food stores. Though their silent steps might pass unnoticed, their presence was deeply valued. A cat curled at the foot of a bed was not only comfort, but protection from the unseen pests of the night. Horses, though too large for the living quarters, were often kept just steps away. Stable doors were within earshot, and many a farmer would rise during the midnight watch to check on a prized mare or foal. Their snorts and hoof-falls, muffled by hay, became part of the night's rhythm. Of course, this closeness also brought its share of discomforts. The air inside medieval homes was thick with scent, of sweat, smoke, wool, and animals. Ventilation was limited. Chimneys were a luxury, and most homes vented smoke through simple holes in the thatch. The mingling of human and animal breath, the musky warmth of their combined presence, created an earthy, dense environment. But this was home, and in its own way, it was a kind of comfort, one born not of elegance, but of familiarity. In monasteries and castles, the story was slightly different. Wealthier families and religious figures had more separated quarters. Stables were distinct, and servants often tended to animals. Yet even in these lofty places, the bond between humans and animals remained. Hunting dogs slept in castle halls, monks kept birds or cats as companions, and in winter months, even nobility sometimes allowed their smallest animals, lapdogs, kittens, to remain indoors. The great tapestry of medieval life was interwoven with fur and feather. There were also beliefs surrounding animals and the spiritual realm. In folklore, animals were sometimes said to see spirits. Dogs howling in the night could foretell death. Cats staring at unseen corners of the room might signal a presence. And yet, these same animals were also thought to protect their masters from harm, warding off evil with their keen senses. Thus, their presence during sleep was not merely tolerated, but desired. One chronicler, writing in the 14th century, describes his small spaniel that nestled under his blanket each night, offering warmth and quiet joy. Another poem from a Welsh bard speaks tenderly of a lamb that lay beside a shepherd boy, gentler than prayer, warmer than flame. This kind of poetry reminds us that medieval people, though hardened by toil, retained deep wells of tenderness. In the quiet companionship of their animals, they found solace against the world's coldness. And so, each night, as sleep settled over villages and manors alike, it did so upon a living, breathing congregation. Not only fathers and mothers, but chickens, dogs, goats, cats, and sometimes even the occasional duck or hedgehog, shared in the shelter of hearth and home. The warmth was not just of bodies, but of bond, a bond between those who laboured under the same sun, walked the same muddy paths, and found peace beneath the same stars. In our modern world, silence at night is often pursued as a rare luxury. Sealed windows, white noise machines, thick curtains to dampen sound. But in the Middle Ages, silence was not absolute. Night held its own music, a textured chorus of the living, both human and animal, that hummed softly beneath the stars. Let us return to the medieval village as night deepens. The fire has faded to red embers, and most souls have entered their second sleep. Yet the world does not sleep entirely. From the thatched rooftops and forested edges, life continues gently, without spectacle. First, there are the natural sounds, the night calls of owls, their low hoots echoing through trees, the creaking of old wooden beams in homes shifting with the cool air, the rustle of straw as someone turns in their sleep. If it is spring or summer, the chirr of crickets or the gentle croak of frogs in the marsh. Each of these sounds was expected, almost comforting. They signaled that the world remained as it should. The owl hunts, the hearth cools, the air stirs gently, and sleep, in its second rhythm, holds fast. Yet not all sounds were so mild. Wolves were not yet relegated to myth. In many parts of Europe, their howls were a real and eerie reminder of the wilderness beyond the hedge. Villagers knew the sound well, especially in the far-reaching edges of France, Germany, or the Carpathians. The howling of wolves was often met with silent prayers for safety, or in some cases, for the soul of the one whose spirit they were said to call. Dogs, ever alert, might bark in answer, a chain reaction of short, sharp calls rolling across farms and fields. Sometimes it was a passing traveller. Other times, a fox nosing near the chicken coop. But always, these noises passed, and the night would regain its calm. In towns, the soundscape changed. Narrow streets echoed differently, bouncing sound off stone and timber. A watchman might call the hour. 2 o' the clock and all's well. His staff tapped rhythmically on cobblestones as he walked, lanterns swinging. In some cities, Bells tolled at set times throughout the night, marking the canonical hours or warning of curfew violations. Inside inns and boarding houses, late drinkers might stir with drunken songs, followed quickly by snores or soft weeping, the sound of a rat scratching at a pantry door, the creak of a stair under a cautious step, all part of the nocturnal world. Even the body had its sounds. Without modern medicines or sleep aids, snoring was common. Coughs echoed softly, especially in winter. The moaning of the ill, the babble of a dreaming child, or the quiet hum of a mother soothing an infant, all mingled together beneath the sagging beams of a shared roof. And then, there were the sounds of nature's restlessness, storms rolling across open plains, thunder booming so mightily it shook the shutters, rain pattering against wooden roofs or seeping through thatch, wind whistling through the gaps in doors, rustling eaves, or lifting the corners of blankets if not carefully tucked. But despite all of this, the medieval sleeper was not so disturbed. These were the sounds of their world, familiar, unthreatening, unless proven otherwise. The ear learned to discern between safe noise and danger noise. A rooster crowing at the wrong hour might be ignored, but the sharp, sudden squeal of a distressed pig could bring a farmer out of bed in seconds. The crash of a barn door swinging loose, the crack of a tree branch snapping under weight, these were messages, not mere sound. And then there were the sounds only some claimed to hear. Monks wrote of angelic choirs heard in dreams. Peasants spoke of hearing ghostly whispers or the crying of the wild hunt. Spirits said to ride through the sky on stormy nights, chasing souls or foretelling death. Such tales were passed from mouth to ear, often retold by the light of morning, softened into folklore. The night had a personality. It breathed and moved. It spoke, sometimes gently, sometimes harshly, but always with presence. Many medieval people found solace in these nocturnal murmurs. The clatter of hooves passing on the road meant life continued, that travellers still moved beneath the moon. The lowing of cows in the neighbouring byre meant the herd was content. Even the church bells calling matins in a distant abbey were reminders of God's order in the world. Of course, there were those who struggled with sleep too. For them, these sounds could be maddening. A mouse rustling in the rushes, the groan of a restless neighbour. But such discomforts were rarely complained of. Sleep was seen not as a guaranteed right, but as a gift, sometimes bountiful, sometimes withheld. In literature and letters, references to sleeplessness often carried spiritual weight. A poor man lying awake might turn to prayer. A noble lady, disturbed by dreams, might see them as divine omens. Sleep and wakefulness both were thresholds, moments when the veil between flesh and soul grew thin, and as the stars faded and birds began to stir, the village would rise again. The sounds of the night faded into the sounds of day, iron on iron, wood on wood, voices rising once more. But in that liminal space, when darkness still held the corners of the sky, the medieval sleeper had travelled through a living world, surrounded not by silence, but by a tapestry of sound. Each creak and chirp, each bark and sigh, was part of the fabric of sleep, a reminder that even in the stillest hours, life goes on. The life of a medieval peasant was shaped by labour, steady, unrelenting, and bound to the will of the land. From sunrise to sundown, their bodies bent to plough, to scythe, to carry, and to build. And when the day's work was done, sleep was not a ritual of luxury, but a surrender to fatigue. Peasants made up the vast majority of the medieval population. Their homes were simple, one-room huts, walls of wattle and daub, roofs of thatch. Inside, space was limited, and every item had purpose. Beds, if one could call them such, were often straw-stuffed sacks or low wooden platforms topped with hay and cloth. Some households had only one such resting space, shared among multiple generations. Their days began early. Before the first light broke over the horizon, the peasants stirred. Roosters crowed, cows lowed, and a new cycle of effort began. It was not uncommon for someone to rise at 4 or 5 in the morning, especially in planting or harvest season. In summer, the sun dictated the rhythm. In winter, work bent to the shorter days, though preparation for cold months extended into the dim hours. By the time night came, the body had known deep exertion. Muscles sore, feet blistered, hands calloused. Sleep came not gently but with the force of collapse. A peasant's first sleep was deep and almost immediate. They lay not with thoughts swirling, but with bodies spent, curled under heavy wool or simply cloaks repurposed for warmth. Yet even in this exhaustion, routine held its place. Before sleeping, a simple prayer might be said, not grand, but heartfelt, asking for strength, for health, for mercy on the next day's tasks. Children, if they had the strength, might whisper questions or songs. Elders, who no longer worked the fields, often spoke into the night, their voices low and worn, telling stories or reciting prayers memorized in childhood. The sleep itself, though hard-earned, was still subject to interruption. Infants cried, animals stirred. The air, thick with human breath and animal musk, was hot in summer and icy in winter. Yet, strangely, the peasants adapted. Their sleep was flexible, light when it needed to be, deep when the body demanded. For some, there was no proper bed at all. In overcrowded households, younger family members might sleep on benches, near the hearth, or even on the dirt floor with only a blanket. It was not uncommon to tuck feet near the embers for warmth, curling up like cats in the lingering heat of the fire. Despite these conditions, or perhaps because of them, sleep became sacred in its own way. It was one of the few moments truly owned. There were no lords to answer to, no tithes to deliver, no orders to obey. In sleep, the body healed, and the soul, however weary, could drift freely. Second sleep, for the peasant, might not always come as naturally as it did for the monk or noble. Often the first sleep was so deep that waking at midnight simply didn't happen. Yet in households where it did, the same rituals unfolded. Quiet prayers, tending to embers, perhaps even time for mending tools or clothes by firelight. Dreams played an important part in peasant culture. Though literacy was rare, imagination was not. Tales of dreams being warnings or messages from saints circulated widely. If a peasant dreamt of a white deer, it might mean a good harvest. If a dream featured blood or falling teeth, it was taken as a warning. Older women, often the keepers of folk knowledge, would interpret dreams for younger kin. These night visions were part of a peasant's spiritual understanding, bridging the hard days with a sense of unseen mystery. When illness came, and it often did, sleep was both remedy and risk. Fevers broke in the night or worsened with chilling draughts. The body, when sick, sought rest more deeply, curling into itself. But with little access to doctors, sleep was also a time of uncertainty. Would one wake improved, or not wake at all? Children, the quiet treasures of a peasant household, were watched carefully during sleep. A mother might press her hand to a feverish brow or whisper to St. Margaret for protection. If the child breathed evenly, the parent might finally close their own eyes with a sigh of relief. There was beauty in these small nightly acts. Outside, the wind might whistle through trees, and wolves howl faintly in the distance. But inside, the hearth's glow flickered, and the soft rise and fall of breath filled the air. A father's calloused hand rested over his daughter's sleeping back. A mother's fingers remained tangled in her son's hair, long after she, too, had fallen asleep. The sleep of the peasant was not a quiet luxury, but a necessary refuge. It was a space carved out of hardship, a return to simplicity. The labor of each day made rest not just desirable, but vital. And when morning returned, as it always did, the peasant awoke with no need for alarm bells, only the rhythm of nature, of need, and of responsibility. They rose, stretched sore limbs, and stepped again into the world that had neither changed nor paused. but for a few brief hours each night, they had lain in peace, in stillness, and in sleep. Within the thick stone walls of castles and manors, sleep took on a different form. For the noble class of medieval Europe, bedtime was not only a matter of rest, but also of power, symbolism, and deliberate performance. The chamber of a noble was not just a sleeping space. It was a stage, a sanctuary, and sometimes a battlefield of subtle influence. Step into the solar of a 13th century castle, the private quarters of a high-ranking lord or lady. The room is large, high-ceilinged, with a hearth carved of limestone and narrow windows that peer over the bailey below. Thick tapestries hang on walls, not only for decoration, but to insulate against the cold. The air is tinged with the scent of beeswax and lavender, perhaps from a bath recently drawn in a wooden tub. In the corner stands a great bed, canopied, draped with heavy curtains, raised on a wooden platform. Unlike the straw mattresses of the peasant, these beds are filled with feathers or wool, covered in linen sheets, sometimes embroidered. Furs lie folded at the foot. Silk pillows, when available, add both comfort and splendor. But this was not just a place to sleep, it was a place to be seen. In courtly culture, the bedchamber served as a semi-public space. Close advisors, ladies-in-waiting, and high-ranking guests might be invited to witness the noble preparing for bed, or even to attend the formal waking in the morning. These rituals reinforced the noble's status, piety, and grace. For monarchs, these acts were often highly ceremonial, dressings and undressings observed with quiet reverence. Privacy was a rare and precious commodity. Even for the powerful, servants were ever present, preparing linens, stoking fires, delivering warm wine or possets before sleep. A nobleman might share his chamber with squires or bodyguards, a noblewoman with her maids. Only the very highest ranks could ensure total solitude, and even then, it was not always desired. Married nobles often shared beds, though not always for affection. Marital alliances were political unions, and shared sleep symbolized unity. Yet many also kept separate chambers, especially as age or infirmity changed their needs. In some households, sleeping arrangements shifted with the seasons, moving from upper floors in summer to lower, warmer rooms in winter. Sleep itself was affected by privilege. Nobles often dined late into the evening, enjoying meats, cheeses, spiced wines, and sweetmeats. This rich fare sometimes caused uneasy digestion, prompting remedies or special drinks to ease rest. Physicians, when available, might offer advice on temperate sleep, recommending herbs like valerian, chamomile, or poppy. Still, nobles were not immune to the anxieties that haunted the night. War, political plots, illness, and the burdens of legacy weighed heavy. Many nobles prayed intensely before bed, kneeling at small chapels within their quarters, or using illuminated books of hours to recite the compline. Dreams were taken seriously, often interpreted by chaplains or wise women. Illness brought even greater solemnity to the chamber. When a noble was bedridden, the bed became a sacred place. Confessors, family, and advisors gathered. Wills were dictated. The body, so long seen as a vessel of strength and lineage, now lay still, watched not only for signs of recovery, but also for omens of departure. For noblewomen, the bedchamber held additional significance. It was the space of childbirth, a dangerous and holy act. Midwives, female relatives, and priests gathered. Candles were lit. Prayers invoked St. Margaret and St. Anne. And once the child was born, the mother rested for days or weeks in the same chamber, surrounded by women, nursing and healing in quiet seclusion. Yet even amid such gravity, there were moments of softness. A young page might sing softly at the hearth. A nobleman, weary from the hunt, might drift into sleep beside his hounds. A lady, cradling a child, might smile faintly in the low light of a tallow candle. These human moments bridged the distance between class and condition. For all their privilege, nobles, too, knew the sweetness of rest, the comfort of warmth, the ache of longing. One curious custom among the elite was the nightshirt exchange, where lords and ladies, when parting or courting from afar, would send garments to be worn during sleep. These pieces of cloth, infused with the scent of the wearer, became tokens of affection, remembrance, and even spiritual connection. There was also the matter of security. Castles, though fortified, were not beyond treachery. Guard rotations were posted, bolts drawn, daggers kept within reach. A noble's sleep might be watched over by trusted retainers, especially in turbulent regions. Rest was rarely careless. It was layered with caution. Even in dreams, nobles were not alone. Poets of the court wrote of dream visions, knights traversing mystical landscapes, lovers meeting beneath moons of gold, queens receiving divine messages. These stories reflected both the desires and the burdens of the ruling class. Sleep became a realm of symbol where the mind could venture beyond duty into desire, prophecy, and redemption. In all of this, the tapestries, the featherbeds, the formalities and fears, one finds the echo of a truth as old as time, that no matter the wealth or weight of one's title, sleep remains a universal need, a place where even kings and queens must lay down their crowns and close their eyes. And so, behind curtains drawn against the wind, the noble slipped into the hush of night. The fire dimmed, the air cooled, the heart for a time found stillness. And the dreams, those wandering, whispering things, began to stir. Within the high stone walls of the medieval monastery, life followed a rhythm not dictated by seasons or sunlight, but by sacred hours. This was the cloistered world of monks, where prayer and silence wove the fabric of each day and each night. Here, sleep was not private or indulgent, but measured, purposeful, and tethered to divine order. To understand how monks slept is to understand their world. The rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, served as the guiding light for many Western monastic communities throughout the Middle Ages. It was not only a spiritual manual, but a detailed map of daily life, down to the very pattern of rest. The monastic day was divided into canonical hours, set times for prayer, reading, work, and sleep. Chief among these was the night office, known as matins or vigils, which often took place in the dark hours just past midnight. This meant that monks did not sleep through the night, but woke to gather and chant in the chapel, voices lifted together in praise while the rest of the world slumbered. The first period of sleep began early. After Compline, the final evening prayer, the monastery dimmed. Candles were extinguished, cloisters emptied. The monks returned to the dormitory, a long, cold hall where dozens of simple beds lined the walls. These were not the beds of noble luxury, nor the hay-strewn corners of the peasant's cottage. They were austere, wooden frames, straw mattresses, plain woolen blankets. No curtains, no pillows of comfort. Only what was necessary. Each monk had his place. There was no talking, no laughter, no lingering. The silence of the dormitory was sacred. The room itself was unheated, often draughty, and during winter, bitterly cold. Yet monks believed this discomfort was good for the soul, a rejection of bodily indulgence in pursuit of spiritual strength. They slept in their habits, ready to rise at the first ring of the bell. Sleep was not a retreat from life, but a pause in devotion. Around midnight, that pause ended. A bell rang through the cloister, a low, solemn toll that echoed through stone corridors and stirred the monks from their rest. One by one, they rose, dressed more fully, and moved through the dark with quiet steps. Some carried candles or lanterns. Others relied on memory and instinct to navigate the familiar paths. The chapel awaited, lit dimly by oil lamps or moonlight streaming through narrow stained glass. The walls were thick, the air still. In this sacred space, they began the night office, chants, psalms, scripture readings. The words were ancient, the melodies plain, yet haunting. For some, this hour of prayer was the most profound, a time when the soul, unburdened by daylight concerns, could draw closest to the divine. These offices could last for over an hour, sometimes two. In great abbeys or cathedrals, choirs of monks chanted in complex harmony. In smaller monasteries, the voices were fewer, but no less devout. The sounds echoed off stone, rose to the arches, and lingered there like breath in cold air. When the office ended, the monks returned to their beds for what remained of the night. This second sleep, though shorter, was often deeper. The mind had been calmed, the body cooled, and in that quiet aftermath, rest came with ease. They slept until dawn, when Lauds, the early morning prayer, began the day anew. Not all monasteries followed the same exact routine. Cistercians, known for their strictness, emphasized simplicity and silence even more than the Benedictines. Carthusians lived almost entirely in solitude, with their own cells and private routines. Yet the essence remained. Sleep was segmented, purposeful, and always in service to the soul. Monks also held a special reverence for dreams, not as omens or portents, but as possible encounters with grace. Dreams were considered messages, tests, or gifts from God. Visions of angels, saints, or even one's own sins were not uncommon. A monk who dreamed of fire might wake to pray, seeking absolution or insight. These experiences, though personal, were shared cautiously, sometimes only with an abbot or confessor. Illness or age sometimes altered sleep routines. Older monks were permitted greater rest, though they often clung to the full regimen out of devotion. The infirmary, a separate building or room, offered warmer beds and more lenient schedules. Yet even here, prayer remained. The Psalter was recited over the sick, and the dying were watched with unceasing care, their last breaths surrounded by prayer. Sleep, in the monastic tradition, was thus not a retreat from God, but a continuation of his presence. Even in dreams, the monk remained a servant of the sacred. Outside, the world turned, unaware of this nightly devotion. Villagers slept. Nobles dreamed. Animals stirred in their dens. But within the monastery walls, the bell rang and the faithful rose, not out of compulsion, but out of love. Love for order, for humility, for a life not spent in seeking comfort, but in offering each breath to something greater. And when, at last, the night yielded to the blue edge of dawn, the monks would rise once more, not with groans, but with steady resolve. The day would begin, work awaited, study, silence, and charity would fill the hours. But in their hearts, they carried the stillness of the night, the echo of sacred songs, and the quiet rest found only when the soul is at peace. In the hushed chambers of medieval life, there was no silence more tender than that which surrounded a sleeping child. Amid the smoke-darkened rafters and straw-strewn floors, nestled against the warmth of hearth, or wrapped in a mother's shawl, children found their rest. But this rest, so small and vulnerable, was often watched over with both gentleness and worry. Medieval childhood was a world of its own, at once fleeting and full of ritual. Life was uncertain. Infant mortality was tragically high. Disease, famine, and exposure claimed many before they reached their first years. Because of this, the act of sleep, even for the smallest among them, was approached with quiet reverence. The youngest children often slept in cradles, simple constructions of wood, curved at the base for rocking, sometimes padded with wool or cloth. In wealthier homes, these might be carved and painted, lined with linen. In humbler settings, a mother might craft one herself from local timber, or repurpose a basket for the same use. These cradles were placed close to the parent's bed, or even directly beside the hearth. Warmth was vital, especially in winter. An infant's sleep was light, easily stirred. Mothers and elder siblings would rock the cradle gently, foot tapping rhythmically in the dark, while their hands worked wool or mended garments nearby. Lullabies, passed from mouth to ear over generations, were the songs of comfort and faith. They spoke of angels guarding the crib, of Christ watching over children, of lambs and stars and mothers who never left. Some were sung in Latin, others in the soft, dialects of the region, Breton, Saxon, Lombard. The melodies were repetitive, calming, designed to still not just the child, but the one singing. One popular refrain, preserved in Old English manuscripts, whispered, "Lully, mine liking, my dear son, my sweeting, Lully, my dear heart, mine, own dear darling." Such songs were not merely tradition, they were prayer and protection. In a time when death could come so suddenly, a lullaby was a mother's shield, offering what little control she could summon in a world of fragile hope. Beyond the crib, toddlers and older children often shared beds with siblings or parents. Its sakti was rare for a child to sleep alone. The family bed was wide when possible, or simply a pile of shared bedding on the floor. Bodies nestled together for warmth, comfort, and safety. For children, the night held mysteries. The fire cast strange shapes on walls, the creak of the roof, the distant bark of a dog, the whisper of wind through the thatch. These could stir wonder or fear. Shadows became monsters. Owls, with their haunting calls, were sometimes thought to be witches or wandering souls. To soothe such fears, parents relied on familiar comforts, warm drinks made of honey and milk, stories of saints or animals who conquered the dark, and the soft embrace of a trusted ragdoll or piece of cloth. In some homes, small amulets were hung above the child's resting place, a carved charm, a sprig of rosemary, or a coin blessed by a priest. These tokens served as protection against the nightmare, an old belief in a spirit that pressed down upon sleepers and caused fearful dreams. The nightmare, in this age, was not a psychological phenomenon, but a creature, real and feared. Children were said to be especially vulnerable, their souls still new and soft. In towns and cities, where noise persisted even into the night, children learned to sleep through the bustle of late markets, street cries, and the calls of night watchmen. In rural villages, it was the sounds of animals, cows lowing, geese stirring, the distant howling of wolves, that formed the backdrop to their dreams. Education about sleep was woven into daily life. Children were taught prayers to say before bed, simple verses asking for God's protection through the night and safe waking in the morning. One such prayer, still echoed today, began, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." Mothers and grandmothers often served as guardians of nighttime lore. They whispered stories into the ears of drowsy children, tales of brave knights who never feared the dark, or of holy children visited by saints in their dreams. These narratives, embroidered over time, soothed fears and stirred imagination. But not all nighttime fears were make-believe. Some children suffered from night terrors or fevers, conditions poorly understood in an age before medicine as we know it. A child crying out in their sleep might be thought to be visited by spirits or haunted by a sin left unconfessed. In such cases, holy water might be sprinkled over the bed or a priest consulted. Sometimes, an old woman from the village, a wise woman or healer, was invited to prepare herbs or recite protective chants. Among the nobility, children had their own attendants, nurses, governesses, or wet nurses who cared for them through the night. These women often formed strong bonds with their charges, whispering lullabies in foreign tongues, offering stories from distant villages, or singing prayers learned from their own mothers. In all corners of society, the sleep of children was a matter of deep importance. It marked the line between safety and sorrow, between growth and grief. When a child slept soundly, a home felt blessed. When a child tossed and turned or whimpered into the night, hearts grew uneasy. Despite the harshness of the age, the tenderness shown to children in sleep reveals a softer thread in the medieval world. A child's rest was more than just physical, recovery. It was sacred, precious, and lovingly guarded. And when morning came, when first light filtered through cloth-covered windows or touched the stone walls, the children stirred. They stretched little limbs, rubbed sleepy eyes, and smiled into the warmth of a new day. But for a few sweet hours each night, they had been at peace, in cradles and blankets, in arms and songs, surrounded by a love as ancient as the stars. In the medieval imagination, castles often appear as fortresses of power and order, places of stone and strength, where lords sleep soundly above the labours of others. Yet once night fell, a castle did not sleep as a village might. Behind every flickering torch and creaking stair was a web of quiet motion, responsibility, and ritual. Though the great hall might darken and the nobles retreat to their chambers, the castle never truly slept. Its night was a living system, composed of people, whose lives revolved around the slumber of others. Servants, guards, nurses, cooks, and attendants moved like shadows. Their presence felt more than seen. These were the custodians of silence and safety, ensuring that the powerful could rest in peace. Begin at the gates. At night, the castle gates were barred, heavy timbers drawn, iron bolts set in place, watchmen posted. The drawbridge, if present, was lifted. Torchlight illuminated the path before the portcullis, and sentries made rounds along the battlements. Their steps echoed in steady rhythm, boots on stone, weapons clinking softly in the chill air. Inside the keep, more guards stood post, outside the Lord's chamber, near stairwells, beside the treasury door. They were chosen for loyalty, not merely skill. A breach in these hours, when the castle was at rest, could mean assassination or theft, scandal or uprising. It was a position of trust, and one carried with solemn pride. For the guards, sleep was staggered. Some might rest in the early evening, others during the hours after midnight. They dozed in shifts, fully clothed, ready to rise at the alarm bells, ring. Beneath their quiet discipline lay a readiness to act, to fight, or to die. Elsewhere, servants continued their work. The kitchen hearth, large enough to roast whole animals by day, was banked with coals. A cook might rise early to begin dough for the next day's bread. But in the deep of night, the kitchen was still, its wooden bowls cleaned, its knives hung. The cold stone kept meat fresh, and rats kept at bay by traps or the watchful eyes of cats. In the nursery wing, nurses and wet nurses remained awake or rose frequently to tend the youngest members of the noble line. Infants cried, children stirred, cloths were changed, lullabies hummed. A nurse might pace for hours in a circle, gently rocking a noble babe whose rest refused to come. In the ladies' solar, women whispered in the dark. A noble woman, restless or troubled, might call for her handmaid to read from a book of hours, or braid her hair to soothe her nerves. Night was when worries pressed hardest: political alliances, pending childbirth, the absence of a husband at war. Servants, though uneducated, offered comfort through presence, through touch, through quiet patience. In many castles, the chaplain or priest had quarters nearby. A bell might be rung to summon him in cases of illness, confession, or dreams disturbing, enough to demand counsel. The spiritual heart of the castle beat even in darkness. And beyond these walls, in the cold barracks or servant quarters, others slept 2 or 3 to a cot, wrapped in coarse blankets, bodies turned toward the wall. For warmth, their sleep was harder, interrupted by duty. The call of a bell or shout from a rampart could wake them at any moment. The architecture of the castle itself shaped the night. Echoes travelled easily down stone corridors. A whisper could carry, a door slam could resound like thunder. Thus, great care was taken. Footsteps were padded, torches shielded. Candles were few, saved for the essential. Rooms closest to the hearth were given to the aging or ill. Those farthest, cold, drafty corners near storage, were assigned to stable boys or newcomers. Still, not all motion was dutiful. There were secrets in the castle night. Lovers met in alcoves, their trysts hidden in hours when the eyes of propriety were closed. Servants traded gossip by moonlight, sneaking bread or wine. A child might wander, half dreaming, searching for a mother or comfort, and now and then, darker things moved in shadow. Jealousies whispered, poisons stirred, knives sharpened. The halls of power, though draped in velvet and lit by gold-leafed candelabras, were never entirely free of danger. And yet, there was beauty, too. Look into the great hall, now empty of feast and song. Moonlight filters through narrow windows, casting long shadows across the rush-covered floor. The air smells of wax and roasted meat, of rosewater and stone. A lone cat curls on a bench. A single candle flickers by the altar. This is not desolation, but stillness. A castle at night was a breathing body. Its heartbeat slowed, its breath shallow, but its awareness constant. Somewhere above, a noble stirs in bed, dreams half-formed and fading. In the tower, a guard sighs into the wind. In the kitchens, bread begins to rise in silence. In the chapel, a candle burns for no one but God. This blend of vigilance and vulnerability shaped the very nature of noble sleep. It was never fully without weight. Dreams bore the burden of rule. Rest came only when duty was done, and even then, only in portions. And when the first blush of dawn touched the eastern walls, when birds stirred, bells chimed, and fires were rekindled, the castle awoke. Slowly, in layers, guards returned to barracks. Servants emerged from their slumber, children cried, orders were shouted, water was hauled, the life of power resumed. But for a few hours each night, beneath battlements and banners, beneath stone and star, there was rest. And within that rest, the quiet pulse of responsibility carried on, silent, steady, and never quite asleep. In the hushed hours of the medieval night, rest did not always come easily. For all the weariness brought by labour or the security offered by thick castle walls, sleep was still a fragile visitor. The medieval world, with its rhythms and remedies, understood this well, and so, across peasant huts and noble chambers alike, people turned to age-old sleep aids to ease the body and calm the mind. Chief among these were pillows, but not quite as we know them. Pillows in the Middle Ages were not universally used. For peasants, a simple sack of straw, rags, or even a folded cloak often sufficed. Yet among those who could afford a touch more comfort, pillows were crafted with care and intent. They were often filled not only with feathers or wool, but with herbs chosen for their scent, their symbolism, and their supposed medicinal properties. Lavender was a favourite. Its calming aroma was believed to soothe the nerves, ease headaches, and promote restful sleep. Mixed with chamomile, sweet hay, or rosemary, it created a gentle, earthy fragrance that lingered in the linens. For children, pillows might be stuffed with dried mint or thyme, believed to ward off nightmares and protect the soul during slumber. These herbal pillows were more than pleasant. They were protective. In an age where unseen forces were feared, spirits, bad humours, evil dreams, the scent of certain plants served as both remedy and ward. Sage was said to purify. Valerian, though pungent, was praised for its sedative power. Even roses, dried and crumbled, found their way into the sleep rituals of the well-to-do. Alongside pillows, warm drinks played a role in preparing the body for bed. Chief among these was the posset, a mixture of warm milk, ale or wine, and spices. The milk was gently heated and curdled with alcohol, then flavoured with cinnamon, nutmeg, or honey. Served in a deep-handled cup, the posset was sipped slowly near the fire, often accompanied by bread or a soft biscuit. Possets were believed to settle the stomach and encourage drowsiness. Their warmth comforted the body, while their richness signalled the winding down of the day. In noble households, possets were sometimes served in ornate silver pots, with intricate lids and handles. Among the peasantry, a wooden bowl or clay mug sufficed. The ingredients themselves carried symbolic and practical weight. Milk, as a gift of nature, was seen as nourishing and clean. Honey had healing properties. Ale, mild and common, relaxed the limbs. Wine, more expensive, was used sparingly, but valued for its warming effect. Spices, still rare in many regions, hinted at exotic lands and trade, bringing a touch of wonder to the hearth. For those who could not sleep, those troubled by aches, anxiety, or persistent wakefulness, other remedies were sought. Healers, wise women, and monks kept extensive knowledge of herbs. Poppy seeds, though potent and risky, were sometimes ground into paste and mixed with honey or wine. Their use was cautious, for poppies could be both healer and harmer. Mugwort, known as the dream herb, was burned or placed near the bed to invite restful visions. In monasteries, a monk unable to sleep might be given a tisane, an herbal infusion steeped in hot water. Linden blossoms, lemon balm, and hops were favoured for their calming qualities. The drink was sipped in silence, often accompanied by prayer or scripture. For spiritual insomnia, confession was advised. A troubled conscience was seen as the enemy of peace. In the countryside, women passed down sleep rituals through generations. A hot stone, wrapped in cloth, was placed at the foot of the bed to warm tired limbs. A small bag of herbs, tied with red thread, was slipped beneath the pillow. In some places, a charm of ash wood, carved with a cross, was tucked beneath the mattress to ward off night spirits. Even the act of preparing for sleep was treated with intention. Feet were washed in warm water to draw down heat from the head, a practice believed to encourage restful sleep. Hair was braided loosely to prevent tangling in dreams. In noble homes, a final brush with scented oil or rose water was a mark of both hygiene and calm. In peasant homes, it might simply be a shared basin of water passed around before bed. Prayer, too, was a universal remedy. Whether whispered beside a candle or spoken aloud in Latin, prayer anchored the heart. Deliver us from evil was not an abstract plea. It was a cry from those who feared the night's uncertainties. Saints were invoked for protection. The Virgin was asked to watch over children. Angels were called to guard the soul during Sawai, sleep. And so, the medieval sleeper, tucked beneath rough wool or soft linen, surrounded themselves with little shields. A pillow of lavender, a sip of warm posset, a whispered psalm, the weight of a pet at their feet. These were not luxuries, but necessities of comfort in a world where medicine was limited and darkness long. The body settled slowly. The mind drifted through smells and sounds, herbs, crackling embers, the creak of wood. Dreams came, perhaps touched by the very things placed at bedside. And if the dreamer woke in the middle hours, they reached again for those comforts, for a second chance at peace. Not all sleep was deep. Not every night was restful. But across the centuries, through simplicity and ritual, medieval people learned to soothe themselves. They turned to the earth, to prayer, and to one another. They built small sanctuaries out of straw and steam, honey and hope. And in those sacred, silent hours, with possets drunk and pillows pressed close, they closed their eyes, not into oblivion but into care. Beneath the vast heavens of the medieval world, not all sleep was sheltered. Long before the hum of lanterns or the comfort of roadside inns, many spent their nights under the open sky, where sleep came with the scent of grass and the distant howl of the wind. To sleep outdoors was not always a matter of adventure. More often, it was necessity. Travellers on long journeys, pilgrims bound for Canterbury or Santiago, messengers galloping between castles, merchants with carts heavy with wares, could not always reach a resting place before nightfall. Roads were rough and the distances long. When darkness fell, they stopped where they could. Sometimes it was the edge of a forest, a field near a village, or the banks of a quiet stream. A cloak became a blanket, a saddlebag, a pillow. Fires were built if wood was available, small discreet flames not only for warmth, but to ward off animals or thieves. Where no fire could be made, travellers huddled together, their backs to trees or hillsides, seeking shelter from the wind. The medieval road was not empty of danger. Bandits roamed the woodlands. Wolves, though shy, prowled the edges of settlements. Spirits, too, were said to haunt lonely paths. To many, the dark was not just night, it was alive with the unknown. And yet the wayfarer, weary from walking or riding, often found sleep anyway. Exhaustion made even the hard earth welcome. Shepherds knew this well. Their lives followed the flock. In summer months, they took sheep to distant pastures, highland meadows or open plains, where they remained for days or weeks. There were no inns, no taverns, only the sky and the land. Shepherds slept near their animals, sometimes on a raised pallet or nestled in straw brought from home. A shepherd's night was light and attentive, ears attuned to every bleat, every strange rustle in the grass. They might sleep in turns, one watching while the other rested. Dogs, loyal and sharp-eared, were essential companions, not only herding by day, but guarding the camp by night. And yet, there was peace too. The stars above were steady, ancient. The air, clean and full of scent, grass, sheep, dew. The shepherd, lying back against a rock or pack, looked into the same sky as kings and monks. No wall blocked his gaze, no ceiling pressed down. It was a humbler sleep, perhaps, but not a lesser one. Pilgrims, too, walked the earth by day and slept upon it by night. Bound for shrines and relics, they moved in groups, carrying staffs and satchels, their feet blistered and voices hoarse from prayer. Inns were rare and costly. Many chose to rest in fields by roadside chapels or within the porches of churches. Some monasteries offered shelter, but more often the road was home. These, travelers recited prayers before lying down, placing their trust in God for protection. Some carried small crosses or relics, believing they would keep danger at bay. In the company of fellow pilgrims, they shared stories, bread, and sometimes song. And when sleep came, it was simple and sound. Night, for these outdoor sleepers, was both challenge and teacher. The chill could be biting, the ground uneven. Rain, snow, or dew soaked through cloth. Insects crawled. Yet through discomfort, they learned to surrender, to trust the rhythm of nature, to listen deeply, to rest without possession. Some even sought it deliberately. Hermits and mystics, inspired by saints who wandered the wilderness, chose to sleep in caves, under trees, or beside rivers. They believed that the absence of shelter brought them closer to the divine. To sleep as Christ had done, with no pillow but stone and no roof but sky, was seen as purification. They wrapped themselves in coarse cloaks, kept vigil through part of the night, and rested where the Spirit led. In these quiet, sacred hours, the soul opened. Sleep came not as luxury, but as gift, humble, fleeting, and whole. Children on feast nights or midsummer festivals sometimes joined this outdoor sleep. After fires died and dancing faded, they collapsed beneath stars, wrapped in shawls or cradled in arms. These were magical nights, remembered for lifetimes. The scent of flowers, the echo of songs, the feel of grass beneath one's cheek. And then there were the dispossessed, those without home, without coin. Vagabonds, exiles, beggars. For them, outdoor sleep was not a choice but the only option. Church porches, barn corners, ruined towers, these were their shelters. Kindness was inconsistent. Some villagers offered bread or straw, others turned them away with suspicion. These souls learned to sleep light, to hide well, to rise early. They feared more than wolves, guards, weather, scorn. And yet even among them, moments of peace could be found. A fire shared, a cloak offered, a song hummed. Sleep, despite all, came. For all who slept outdoors in the Middle Ages, the world was at once harsher and larger. There were no clocks, no bedposts, no shutters to draw. Only wind, stars, and the steady movement of time. The body rested as it could, curled against earth and hope. And in the morning, dew on the cloak, sun on the brow, they rose again. The road stretched forward, the sheep needed tending. The shrine waited. The castle called. The world, vast and unsheltered, unfolded like a map of dust and light. But for a time, in that quiet space between exhaustion and waking, they had slept, beneath the open sky, with nothing but breath and prayer and the patience of stars. To sleep in the Middle Ages was never simply to rest. It was to open the self, body and soul, to the mysteries of the night. And foremost among these mysteries were dreams. In an age before psychology, dreams were not dismissed as mental echoes. They were believed to carry messages from God, from angels, from saints, or more darkly, from demons and restless spirits. The line between divine revelation and ominous warning was often thin, and the medieval dreamer learned to walk it with both awe and caution. The roots of dream interpretation stretched far. Ancient texts, such as the Dream of Scipio or Oneirocritica by Artemidorus, were read and copied in monasteries. These works, drawn from Roman and early Christian thought, offered keys to deciphering the hidden meanings behind night visions. For the learned, dreams were structured signs. A man dreaming of a crown might be destined for greatness, or death, depending on the circumstances. A woman dreaming of fire could be pregnant. Falling teeth? A sign that someone close would perish. Dreams of flying were often linked to pride or spiritual longing, while drowning might signify sin, fear, or a coming trial. But it was not only scholars who held these beliefs. In cottages and fields, among shepherds and midwives, a folk tradition of dream wisdom thrived. A grandmother might say that dreaming of eggs foretold fertility, or that to dream of one's own wedding was a sign of mourning. These sayings, passed orally, varied by region, but shared a common view, that dreams were more than mere shadows. Nightmares were feared deeply. The mare in Nightmare was thought to be a creature, an evil spirit or succubus that sat upon the chest of a sleeper, stealing breath and sowing terror. People spoke of waking unable to move, hearts pounding, eyes wide, in the dark. Today, we call this sleep paralysis. Then, it was evidence of spiritual attack. To prevent such horrors, charms were employed. Bundles of herbs, especially mugwort or rue, were hung above the bed. Psalms were recited before lying down. Some stitched protective words into their pillows. Latin, phrases invoking Saint Michael, or even the name of Christ. Others placed an iron nail beneath the mattress, or a carved cross of ash wood at the headboard. In monastic life, dreams were approached with both reverence and scrutiny. A monk dreaming of angelic choirs or visions of light might believe himself blessed. Yet he would still seek counsel, for pride could twist even the holiest vision. Dreams of demons or temptation were viewed as trials. The devil was cunning, it was said, and could appear as light to mislead the faithful. Some monks recorded their dreams. In illuminated manuscripts, we find references to visions of cities burning, voices calling from the sky, or journeys through fantastic landscapes. These were not fantasies but spiritual experiences, ripe for contemplation. Among nobility, dreams could have political consequence. Kings feared them, queens pondered them. If a noble dreamt of snakes in the bedchamber, it might be interpreted as betrayal from within their court. A vision of falling towers could inspire fears of war or rebellion. Dream interpreters were summoned, often learned, men with scriptural and classical training. One chronicler tells of a French lord who dreamt of wolves entering his hall and devouring his guests. Days later, he received news of treachery among his retainers. The story, whether true or shaped by hindsight, became part of that family's lore, a caution passed down. Among the common folk, dreams were shared over morning bread or whispered at twilight. Children spoke of flying, of running through fields of light. Elders listened carefully. The tone, the setting, the dreamer's mood, all mattered. In some villages, a woman known for her insight might serve as the dream seer. People brought her their dreams, simple, tangled, terrifying, and she offered meaning, often rooted in scripture or seasonal symbolism. Her interpretations, though not official, carried weight in the community. Divination by dreams sometimes crossed into forbidden territory. The church warned against certain practices, using dreams to predict the future, invoking spirits to inspire visions, or relying on dreams more than scripture. Yet these cautions did little to silence belief. The need to understand, to find meaning, was too strong. Even priests confessed to dreaming and wondering. Dreams connected the sleeper to realms, both high and low. They offered reunion with the dead. Many spoke of lost mothers or siblings visiting in dreams, speaking gently, offering comfort. Others believed dreams could carry prayers to heaven. If one dreamt of kneeling in a great cathedral or lighting candles, it might mean a need for penance, or that their soul had risen briefly, touching holiness. And in some dreams, the line between vision and reality blurred. A knight might wake swearing he'd seen his own death. A mother might dream of her child in danger, only to find them ill the next morning. These coincidences fed the belief that dreams were threads, fragile, glittering lines between worlds. Dreams also inspired creation. Poets, minstrels, and bards often spoke of composing songs from dream-born visions, a melody heard while sleeping, a face glimpsed that became the hero of a tale. The dream vision became a literary form, especially in England and France, where entire poems were framed as recountings of a night's dream. These stories were not just entertainment, they offered moral instruction, social commentary, and spiritual reflection. The Book of the Duchess, Piers Plowman, and the Divine Comedy all contain dreams as central narrative devices, realms where the soul journeys, learns, repents, or finds truth. Sleep, then, was not just rest, it was a door, and the dreamer, whether peasant, monk, or king, passed through it each night. Sometimes they returned with memories, sometimes with fear, sometimes with nothing but silence, yet always with the sense that something had happened, unseen, unsaid, but somehow important. In the quiet after such dreams, one might sit up in bed, whisper a prayer, or simply listen to the wind, the breath of a sleeping child, the far-off call of an owl, and wonder, as countless others had, what the night had just tried to say. Midnight. In the medieval mind, this hour was no mere point on the clock. It was a boundary, a thin, perilous threshold between one day and the next, between the seen and the unseen, between the known world and the realm of spirits. It was known, not just as midnight, but often as the witching hour, a time when danger crept silently from the corners of the dark. The belief in this haunted hour was widespread. Though the term witching hour would not be formally used until later centuries, the idea was fully alive in the Middle Ages. It was the time when witches were believed to gather, when devils whispered their temptations, and when unquiet, souls wandered through towns and forests, seeking rest or revenge. Church bells marked the hour, though not all communities rang them at midnight. In monastic settings, bells summoned monks for the night office, matins. Yet outside cloistered life, midnight was more commonly felt than heard. It arrived with a stillness unnatural. Dogs stopped barking. The wind hushed. Fires burned lower, their glow faint and red. People feared this silence, for it was believed that this was the time when the powers of darkness were strongest. Witches, those women, and sometimes men, accused of consorting with the devil, were said to perform their rites at this hour. Naked in the woods or gathered in hidden cellars, they were imagined to chant spells, summon storms, or fly on broomsticks, though much of this imagery was shaped later by inquisitorial fantasy. Still, villagers whispered of lights seen flickering. In the hills, strange laughter heard near old trees, or sudden illness that followed a midnight dream. These were not always seen as coincidences. Folklore wove tightly around this hour. It was said that if you stood at a crossroads at midnight, you could hear the devil speak, or your own future whispered by an unseen voice. Some claimed that herbs, picked at this hour, especially under a full moon, gained powerful properties, both healing and harmful. In some regions, people avoided mirrors at midnight, fearing they might see more than their reflection. Others hung bells over their doors or scattered salt on windowsills, believing these simple measures could keep evil spirits at bay. Iron, too, was a protector. Nails driven into door frames, scissors placed beneath pillows, horseshoes nailed above entryways. For those who slept during this hour, the fear remained. Nightmares were more likely. The nightmare was said to be especially active, pressing down on sleepers' chests and robbing them of breath. A person might wake sweating, unable to move, convinced they had been visited by something dark. Today, this is known as sleep paralysis. Then, it was spiritual warfare. Children were watched closely. A child who woke crying or wandered sleepwalking was not simply restless, but possibly under enchantment. Stories told of changelings, fairy children left in place of human infants, who grew agitated at midnight. Parents prayed over cradles, made the sign of the cross, or tied red thread to the crib to offer protection. In towns, the night watch patrolled the streets, not only to deter thieves, but to provide a sense of security against the unknown. They carried torches, rang bells at intervals, and sometimes recited prayers aloud. Their presence was a reassurance, but it also reminded people that the night required vigilance. For healers and midwives, midnight could be a critical hour. Births that began at midnight were sometimes viewed with apprehension. A child born at the witching hour might be marked by fate, gifted or cursed, wise beyond years, or shadowed by misfortune. Women giving birth during these hours were bathed in candlelight, surrounded by whispered prayers and fragrant herbs, like juniper and sage. The Church's stance on these beliefs was complex. While official doctrine discouraged superstition, local priests often participated in protective rites. Holy water was sprinkled over doorways. Psalms were read aloud in homes. Priests blessed fields and homes, each spring not only to invoke fertility, but to drive out evil. Midnight masses, especially on holy nights like Christmas or Easter, were seen as powerful counters to nocturnal fears. In literature, the witching hour took on symbolic power. Writers used it as a moment of decision, crisis, or revelation. It was the time when secrets were confessed, ghosts appeared, or dreams grew. Prophetic, whether in chivalric tales or hagiographies, the deep night carried both terror and transformation. And yet, not all viewed midnight with dread. Mystics and saints often spoke of midnight as the time when God was closest. In the stillness of that hour, when the world lay asleep, the soul could most clearly hear the divine. St. Hildegard of Bingen wrote of visions seen in the silence of night. Julian of Norwich described the deep peace of Christ descending upon her as she watched a single candle flicker at midnight. For them, the darkness was not void, but presence. In some homes, families created their own rituals of protection. A candle was left burning beside the hearth. A prayer was said together before sleep. Some recited the Lord's Prayer thrice at midnight if they awoke, believing it formed a shield around the soul. Others simply lay still, eyes closed, whispering, Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy. And when the hour passed, when the shadows grew lighter and the rooster crowed once more, a subtle relief swept through even the most rational minds. The world had turned. The danger had passed. The balance, for now, had been restored. The witching hour in the medieval world was not about witches alone. It was about fear, of the unknown, of death, of spiritual failure, but also about awe. It was a recognition that night held power, that there were things beyond explanation, that even sleep, a daily surrender, was laced with risk. But within that risk, there was also wonder. For every tale of terror, there was one of revelation. For every shadow, a candle. For every restless sleeper, a prayer rising like smoke toward a listening heaven. In the medieval world, where stone walls and wooden beams framed most lives, the bed was one of the few truly personal spaces, however humble or grand. It was not merely a place to sleep. It was a cocoon of comfort, a haven from hardship, and, in some homes, a symbol of status and inheritance. The structure of the bed varied greatly depending on class and region. For the poor, a bed was often little more than a frame, if that. Many slept on straw-filled mattresses placed directly on the floor or on low wooden platforms. These mattresses, called pallets, were made by stuffing sacks of rough linen or hemp with straw, hay, or even reeds. Over time, the straw compressed and grew musty, needing to be changed regularly. In colder regions, families sometimes placed their beds close to the hearth to take advantage of the warmth. The glow of dying embers offered not just heat, but comfort against the long night. In summer, bedding might be moved closer to open shutters to catch the breeze, though this brought its own problems: insects, humidity, and the sounds of the village beyond. Peasants often slept multiple to a bed. A family of 5 or 6 might, all curl together on a single sleeping space, especially in winter. Children nestled between parents, grandparents curled at the foot. This closeness, though practical, also fostered intimacy and shared warmth. The bedding itself was simple. Woolen blankets, woven at home or bartered at market, served as primary coverings. They were heavy, coarse, and often patched. Wealthier families used finer weaves and dyed cloths, but most peasants made do with undyed natural wool, grey, brown, or off-white. In lean seasons, cloaks or spare clothing doubled as blankets. Even old sacks, cut and layered, added weight against the cold. Sheets were a luxury. Where they existed, they were made from linen, cool in summer, soft with use, but expensive and labour-intensive to produce. Most homes had only 1 or 2 sets, washed rarely. Laundry was a communal effort, often performed at riverside or public. Washhouses and heavy linens took days to dry. Among the wealthier classes, the bed was a statement of refinement. In castles and manors, beds were raised off the floor, supported by carved posts. The grandest had canopies overhead and thick curtains on all sides, forming a private chamber within a room. These curtains served multiple purposes. They blocked drafts, muffled sound, and shielded sleepers from the gazes of servants or guests. For even in noble life, privacy was rare. The feather mattress was a mark of affluence. Feathers from ducks or geese were collected over time, cleaned, and sewn into large tickings. These mattresses were soft, warm, and, for those who had known, straw beds, astonishing in comfort. Yet even these needed maintenance. They sagged, compacted, and attracted pests if not aired and fluffed frequently. Pillows, too, reflected status. A simple household might use a folded tunic or a sack of chaff for a pillow. Nobles used embroidered cushions, sometimes scented with herbs or stitched with family crests. Feather-filled pillows were treasured, and in some cases passed down through generations. It was not uncommon for wills to mention bedding as part of household inheritance. Blankets among the elite were lined with fur, fox, squirrel, or ermine, or edged with silk. Bed coverings might be dyed deep red or blue, or woven with patterns depicting animals, saints, or heraldic designs. In some beds, hot stones wrapped in cloth were tucked beneath the covers to warm the sheets before entry. This was the precursor to the modern hot water bottle. Beds also held symbolic value. The marriage bed, for instance, was central to medieval ceremony and expectation. In noble weddings, the couple's entry into their bed was sometimes a public affair, witnessed by family to ensure the union was consummated. Bed linens were embroidered for the occasion, prayers said, and songs sung. The sheets, once plain, became vessels of legacy. In times of illness, the bed became a place of care and waiting. Herbal sachets were hung nearby. Candles flickered softly. Visitors came to offer prayers. Dying nobles often received their final rites in bed, surrounded by clergy, family, and quiet servants. The bed thus became both cradle and grave, a place of beginnings and endings. For the religious, the bed was also a place of discipline. Monks slept on simple wooden planks or straw-filled mattresses with plain woolen covers. Their beds were unadorned, their rooms sparse. The rule of St. Benedict advised moderation in sleep, avoiding both indulgence and deprivation. Beds were seen as places of rest, not recreation. Despite these many distinctions, across all classes and regions, there were shared practices. Most people slept with their heads elevated, believing it aided digestion and kept bad humors from rising. Beds were usually placed against walls for warmth and stability. In shared spaces, a screen or curtain might divide the sleeping area from the living quarters, offering a sliver of privacy. Bedding was cherished. Families mended blankets with care, washed sheets when possible, and aired mattresses in the sun to keep them fresh. During major feast days, beds might be adorned with flowers or herbs. Children jumping on beds was not always discouraged. It was, in lean times, one of the few available amusements. And so, while the medieval bed may seem crude by modern standards, it held its own kind of luxury. A sanctuary formed not just of fabric and wood, but of care, habit, and belonging. Each night, as candles dimmed and voices faded, people drew their covers close, nestled into straw or feather, and surrendered themselves to sleep. The bed cradled their bodies, bore their dreams, and waited silently for morning. In the medieval world, time was not measured in the sharp clicks of a clock or the glow of digital screens. It moved with the sun, whispered through changing shadows, and deepened in the turning of leaves and the thickening of frost. People marked their days and nights by nature's rhythms, and sleep too followed that quiet order. The first and most powerful influence on sleep was the sun. Without artificial lighting, daily life was governed by light and dark. When the sun dipped below the hills, darkness followed quickly. Twilight was brief and night was long, especially in winter, when dusk arrived early and dawn delayed its return. In the deep winter months, people often slept longer, up to 12 or 14 hours in total, though not continuously. The two-sleep pattern, first sleep followed by a waking hour or two, then a second sleep, fit neatly into the long nights. There was time for both rest and reflection. In summer, by contrast, sleep shortened. Days stretched with labor. The sun lingered in the sky, and people rose earlier to avoid midday heat. In agricultural communities, haymaking, planting, and harvest demanded dawn-to-dusk effort. As a result, bedtime came late, and rest was often lighter and interrupted. Medieval people observed time through a variety of means, most notably the canonical hours. The church structured its day with regular prayers, matins at night, lauds at dawn, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Monks and devout households aligned their routines accordingly. These sacred time markers influenced when people rose, when they worked, and when they slept. In towns and cities, bells helped structure this flow. Church towers rang out the hours with deep, echoing tones that rolled over rooftops and fields alike. These bells were not exact to the minute, but carried a sense of rhythm. People listened, estimated, adjusted. Seasons further shaped the sleep environment. In winter, homes were sealed as tightly as possible. Curtains or animal hides covered windows. Chimneys were shut when not in use. Beds were piled with every available cloth, furs, woolens, even old sacks. Warmth was precious, and sleep came as a retreat from cold. The longer nights also brought more time indoors, fostering conversation, storytelling, and shared dreams. In summer, windows were unshuttered. Thin cloths replaced heavy blankets. People sometimes slept with damp cloths over their faces to cool the air, or placed bowls of water nearby to temper the dryness. In hot regions, some even slept outdoors, on rooftops or in courtyards, exposed to breezes and stars. The harvest season brought its own exhaustion. During these intense weeks, peasants and workers collapsed into bed after long hours in the fields. Their sleep was deep and dreamless, their bodies sore but satisfied. Often they rose before sunrise, guided by the morning star or the cock's crow. Even children shared in the rhythm, learning the natural rise and fall of effort and rest. Autumn, with its lengthening nights and cooling air, was seen as a time of preparation. Firewood was gathered, blankets were mended. Families discussed sleeping arrangements for winter, who would share with whom, where animals would be sheltered, how to best conserve warmth. The shortening days were both a physical and spiritual cue to slow down, reflect, and prepare. The solstices and equinoxes, while astronomical events, held symbolic importance. The winter solstice, marking the longest night, was a moment of pause. People feared its darkness, but also celebrated its promise of returning light. Yule fires were lit. Candles burned through the night. In some traditions, families stayed awake together, vigil keeping through the deepest darkness, then sleeping. Long on the following day, the summer solstice, by contrast, was a time of brief rest. Sleep was short, nights warm. People celebrated with dancing, bonfires, and feasting, often staying awake long into the evening, letting the light linger. Dreams during these nights were said to carry special meanings, influenced by the vitality of the season. Even the moon played a role. A full moon brightened the land enough for travel, gathering, or night work. Some farmers chose to reap by moonlight to avoid the heat of day. Sleep on these nights was lighter, interrupted. Wolves were more active. Owls called louder. Some believed that full moons inspired dreams, madness, or revelations. A new moon, however, brought true darkness. These nights were quiet, deep. Villages seemed to vanish into the landscape. Such nights were feared by some, associated with stealth, thievery, or spiritual unrest, but others found in them a rare depth of rest, a retreat into pure stillness. The medieval year also revolved around feast days and fasts, which influenced sleep in subtle ways. On the eve of saints' days or holy festivals, people often stayed awake longer. They sang, feasted, lit candles. In some traditions, vigil prayers were said through the night, with sleep postponed until the sacred hour had passed. These celebrations could be loud and lively, or deeply contemplative. Conversely, during Lent and other fasts, people ate lightly and went to bed earlier, conserving strength. Their sleep during these periods was often subdued, laced with hunger or spiritual longing. The rhythm of sleep was thus a reflection of religious devotion as much as personal need. Time was also felt in the body. Women tracked the moon for fertility. Men marked the seasons by the weight of labor. Children, free from the constraints of adult work, often slept longer, waking with the sun and dozing again after chores or play. Elders, whose bones ached with age, slept in shorter bursts, rising in the night to pray or stir the embers. In all this, sleep was deeply cyclical. It was not a fixed habit, but a flowing rhythm, shaped by the tilt of the earth, the length of the day, the crackle of leaves underfoot, and the slow melting of snow on the eaves. Medieval people understood rest not as uniform, but as adaptable, a gift that followed the sun and bowed to the seasons. And so, from dusk to dawn, from winter to spring, they slept as the world turned. Sometimes in silence, sometimes to the music of crickets or bells, sometimes alone, sometimes in the warmth of many. Sleep was not an escape from time, it was part of it. Sleep, in the Middle Ages, was not merely a necessity for the body. It was for some a divine experience, an opening of the soul to God, a threshold through which miracles passed, and a sacred state where saints were touched, transformed, or transported. For these holy figures, slumber was not a retreat from the world, but often the very means through which heaven reached them. In the hagiographies, the lives of saints written and revered across centuries, sleep was depicted with reverence and awe. These texts tell of dreams not simply as personal visions, but as divine communications. Angels appeared in the stillness of night. Christ spoke to his chosen in the hush of darkened cells. And many a miracle began in the quiet between midnight, prayers and dawn's first light. One of the most well-known figures associated with sacred sleep is Saint Joseph. Though quiet in scripture, he became a model of the obedient dreamer. In his sleep, angels came to him, telling him to flee with Mary and the Christ child, to take the path of safety into Egypt. Medieval devotion to Joseph included prayers for peaceful and protective slumber, and images of him asleep became a common sight in monasteries and churches. Saint Benedict himself, the father of Western monasticism, was said to have had visions during sleep. In one account, he dreamt of the entire world held in a single ray of light, a moment of mystical clarity that revealed the unity of creation. For Benedictine monks, the idea that God could speak through sleep affirmed the sanctity of every night's rest. Another compelling story surrounds St. Cuthbert of Lindisfarne. As told by the Venerable Bede, Cuthbert often received divine insight through dreams while sleeping in solitude on the Farne Islands. In one instance, he foresaw the death of another bishop during his sleep and awoke with a sense of calm acceptance. His trust in sleep as a spiritual conduit gave shape to the monastic ideal of holy vigilance. But not only monks and male saints were touched in this way. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, the great abbess and visionary of the 12th century, described dreamlike states in which she received heavenly instruction. Though her visions often came during waking hours, they flowed into her sleep, forming a continuous stream of divine revelation. Her writings, filled with cosmic imagery and luminous symbols, blurred the line between sleep and sacred ecstasy. Saint Birgitta of Sweden, too, received messages in dreams. She recorded them faithfully, often awaking in the middle of the night, to write down what she had been shown, visions of heaven, the Virgin, and even warnings for kings and popes. Her dreams were not vague illusions, but rich and detailed dialogues with the divine. In these stories, sleep became a sacred chamber, a sanctuary where the soul could be gently lifted toward heaven, unhindered by the distractions of daylight. It was not only saints who experienced such sleep. Ordinary people, especially those on pilgrimage or engaged in deep prayer, sometimes reported holy slumber. These were states where the body fell into rest during prayer or meditation, and the soul encountered visions of light, peace, or divine presence. Such moments were considered gifts of grace and were sometimes shared publicly as testimonies of faith. The Church, while cautious, did not dismiss all such experiences. When carefully documented, and especially when tied to lives of virtue, these holy dreams and sleeps were preserved in chronicles, used to inspire devotion and deepen belief. Miracles, too, often occurred around sleep. There are accounts of the sick being healed in their sleep after touching relics or praying at a saint's tomb. One story tells of a blind man who slept beside the shrine of St. Thomas Becket and awoke with his sight restored. Another describes a mute child dreaming of St. Martin, then speaking his first words upon waking. In medieval hospitals and hospices run by religious orders, sleep was treated with reverence. Patients were placed near relics, bathed in prayers and hymns, and encouraged to sleep deeply as a path to healing. Monks kept vigil near the bedsides of the dying, reading psalms softly through the night, that their final sleep might be one of peace and passage. In monasteries, a special emphasis was placed on sleep as a preparation for eternity. The act of going to bed was likened to preparing the soul for death, a surrender, a silence, a hope of waking in paradise. Monks said prayers each night not only for rest but for readiness. Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit, was more than liturgy. It was the soul's quiet exit. Some saints were even said to have died in sleep, their faces peaceful, their hands folded. Their breath faded gently as if slipping from one dream into a greater one. Such deaths were seen as signs of divine favor, proof that they had lived well and slept into holiness. Art of the period reflected these beliefs. In manuscript margins, saints are sometimes shown asleep, with golden halos glowing above them. Carvings on tombs depict sleeping knights and maidens with closed eyes, their postures serene. These were not images of unconsciousness, but of grace. Death and sleep were not feared when touched by the divine. There were rituals too surrounding sleep for the devout. Before bed, many knelt to pray. Psalms were recited. Crosses were made over pillows. In some homes, a candle burned through the night, a small vigil kept until morning. Children were taught to say, "If I should die before I wake," not as fear, but as trust, that sleep, like life, was held in God's hand. And so, as night fell across cloister and cottage, cathedral and forest, the faithful lay down, not just to rest, but to open their hearts. They surrendered not into emptiness, but into the possibility of vision. They knew that the soul did not always sleep, even when the body stilled. And in the silence of those sacred hours, miracles waited, not loud, not grand, but soft as breath, gentle as a hand upon the brow, certain as dawn. In a time when most souls surrendered to the hush of sleep, there remained a quiet brotherhood of those who did not. Watchmen and wanderers, monks and midwives, travellers and guards. These were the keepers of the medieval night, those whose eyes stayed open while the world dreamed. Their role was often thankless, their presence unnoticed unless something went wrong. Yet they moved through the night with purpose, their footsteps threading through darkness like quiet stitches, holding the fabric of community together. Let us begin with the watchman. In towns and cities, the night watch was a formal duty. Men were assigned to patrol the streets from dusk until dawn. Some were hired. Others, especially in smaller towns, served in rotation, part of their obligation as citizens. Equipped with lanterns, staffs, or swords, they walked narrow lanes and shadowed alleys, calling the hour and announcing that all was well. 10 o'clock, and all's quiet. Midnight, God keep the peace. Their voices echoed off timber and stone, a reassurance to those in bed and a warning to those who meant harm. Fires were a constant fear in medieval towns. Roofs of thatch, close quarters, and open flames made vigilance essential. The watchmen sniffed for smoke, checked shutters, and listened for cries. They also enforced curfew. Many towns had laws forbidding public movement after a certain hour, unless for urgent need. Those found wandering without cause could be fined, arrested, or in troubled times, presumed to be spies or thieves. Beyond town walls, the castle guard kept similar vigil. On ramparts and towers, soldiers paced in the cold. Their eyes scanned the horizon for firelight, movement, or sound. Torches flickered behind arrow slits. The clang of steel boots on stone marked their rounds. These were not mere sentries. They were the line between safety and siege. A single slip could spell disaster. They, too, worked in shifts, sleeping in barracks for a few hours before rising again. Hot broth, prayers to St. George, and the companionship of comrades helped them endure long nights. In the dead of winter, frost rimed their cloaks, and their breath hung in the air like ghosts. Yet they stood, alert, while the noble and servant alike slumbered behind thick walls. Monks, too, rose in the night. Bound by their rule, they woke for matins and kept vigil in candlelit chapels. In these hours, they read, sang psalms, and reflected. The world outside was silent, and in that silence they believed the soul could hear God more clearly. Yet not all who stayed awake did so by choice. Midwives and healers were often summoned in the night. A knock on the door, a woman in labour, a child burning with fever, a man struck by sudden ailment. With cloaks thrown over nightclothes, they grabbed their bags of herbs and knives and walked into the dark. The roads were muddy, the wind sharp, but duty called louder. They moved house to house, sometimes returning home only as the sky turned pale. Their knowledge of the body, of childbirth and suffering, made them vital. In return, they were respected, feared, or whispered about, especially when lives could not be saved. There were also those who walked the night because they had no bed, the wanderers, the lost, the cursed. Some were pilgrims, traveling to distant shrines, unable to afford inns. Others were vagabonds, living on the margins of society. They slept beneath hedges, in church porches, or under carts. If caught on the road after dark, they risked accusation and punishment. Yet many still walked toward hope, escape, or simply survival. In tales and ballads, the wanderer often takes on a mythical hue, the knight-errant, seeking honor, the monk on a lonely journey of penance, the child stolen by fairies and returned years later, unchanged. These stories were not only entertainments, they were reflections of real, if rare, experiences of those who lived outside the rhythm of day and night. There were others, too, who kept watch indoors, mothers of the sick, fathers pacing near cradles, lovers unable to sleep, staring into firelight, hearts full of longing or regret. They sat beside beds, whispering prayers, counting breaths, waiting for morning. Their vigil was no less sacred for being unseen. In large households, servants stayed alert while their masters slept. Cupbearers, cooks, and chambermaids all kept one ear open for a summons. A knock at the door, a moan from the upper chamber, a restless lord demanding wine, or a lady calling for her nurse. They moved quickly, quietly, trained to glide rather than clatter, to serve without stirring the silence. Even among the animals, some stayed watchful. The dog at the door, the cat in the rafters, the rooster stirring before dawn. These quiet companions, woven into the life of households and barns, shared the burden of the night. In a deeper sense, the medieval world understood the value of waking watchfulness. 2. Be awake while others slept was not simply to endure darkness. It was to protect, to intercede, to carry the night safely forward. It was a form of love, love for community, for family, for God. And so, the night passed not in stillness, but in soft movement, boots on stone, cloaks in wind, a hand over a fevered brow, the crackle of hearths, the click of rosary beads, the low chant of monks, all part of the night's quiet pulse. The watchers and wanderers did not ask for thanks. They did not often speak of their role, but without them, the sleepers would not sleep so soundly. Their wakefulness formed a kind of lullaby, a soft assurance that, even in the deepest dark, someone was there. Someone was listening. Someone was watching, until the light returned. Though sleep in the Middle Ages was often revered as a gift, an essential rhythm of life, a sacred portal, a balm for weary bodies, it was also known to go wrong. When it did, the effects were deeply unsettling. Without modern science to explain night terrors, sleepwalking, or insomnia, people turned to their beliefs, their folklore, and their fears. Foremost among these disturbances were nightmares. A nightmare, in medieval understanding, was not just a bad dream. It was a force, a presence. The word itself derives from the Old English mare, a supernatural being thought to sit upon the chest of sleepers, pressing down on their lungs, paralyzing their limbs, and flooding their minds with images of terror. People awoke gasping for air, drenched in sweat, unable to cry out. Today, we call this sleep paralysis. Then, it was seen as an attack, either from a malevolent spirit or, in darker beliefs, from a demon or a witch's curse. These night visits were feared across cultures. In Scandinavian lands, the mara or mare was a shadowy woman who slipped into houses through keyholes, bringing disturbed sleep. In Germany, tales of the Alp told of goblin-like creatures who tormented sleepers with dreams and sometimes sat invisibly on their chests. To guard against such intrusions, households employed many protections. Garlic was hung above doors, iron scissors or nails were placed beneath pillows, salt was sprinkled on the floor near the bed, sometimes in a circle, to trap or repel spirits. In more religious homes, crucifixes were fixed to walls, and blessed candles burned near the bed. The names of saints, especially Saint Michael, were invoked to drive off evil. Prayers were whispered upon waking from a nightmare. Some kept holy water by the bedside to sprinkle themselves before sleep or after a bad dream. The Lord's Prayer, said 3 times, was thought to restore peace to the disturbed soul. Yet not all sleep disorders were seen as supernatural. Some people walked in their sleep. Sleepwalking, or noctambulism, was known if not understood. Villagers might speak in hushed tones about those who wandered at night, eyes open but minds adrift. Some walked simple paths, to a door, a table, a hearth. Others ventured outside, across fields, even climbing onto roofs or walls. Those who witnessed sleepwalking were instructed not to wake the sleeper abruptly. It was believed that to do so might steal their soul or trap them between worlds. Instead, family members would gently guide the sleeper back to bed, whispering prayers or familiar phrases to ease their return. The causes were unknown. Some believed it was due to a restless spirit or dreams too powerful to contain. Others thought it was connected to imbalance in the body's humours, too much black bile perhaps, or excess heat in the brain. Still others saw it as a sign of spiritual calling, or a burdened conscience seeking escape. In noble courts, sleepwalkers were sometimes watched with fascination. Stories circulated of ladies who walked corridors by moonlight, hands reaching as if in prayer, eyes seeing something unseen. Some believed they received visions, others whispered of curses. But for the poor, sleep disturbances were often more dangerous. A peasant who screamed in the night, flailed in their sleep, or spoke in strange tongues upon waking might be suspected of possession or madness. In tight quarters, such events frightened others. Children wept, elders prayed. In extreme cases, a priest was summoned to bless the home, or a healer brought in to offer herbal remedies or whispered charms. Herbs like valerian, poppy and chamomile were used to calm troubled sleep. A cloth soaked in rosewater might be placed on the forehead. Incantations were murmured over sleeping heads. Sometimes special amulets, carved from bone or inscribed with Latin, were hung above the bed or worn around the neck. Insomnia, though, less sensational, was equally troubling. A sleepless night meant exhaustion the next day. For those who laboured, this could mean injury, illness, or failure to complete vital tasks. Chronic sleeplessness was often blamed on a hot brain, an overactive mind, or spiritual unrest. People were advised to drink warm milk, bathe their feet, or read Holy Scripture aloud until sleep came. In monasteries, sleepless monks were encouraged to pray silently. They might walk the cloister, kneel before a candle-lit crucifix, or copy Scripture. Wakefulness was not condemned, but it was to be sanctified. If the body would not rest, the soul should labour instead. Sleep disturbances were also linked with the supernatural. There were tales of witches stealing dreams, of souls being pulled from bodies in the night. One legend told of a man who slept too deeply and awoke to find himself buried alive, mistaken for dead. Another spoke of a girl who dreamed so vividly of a journey to a far-off land that when she awoke, her shoes were worn thin and her hands smelled of ocean. Such stories, while fantastical, expressed the deep fear and wonder people felt about sleep. It was not a passive state, it was a journey, and sometimes that journey went astray. Dreams, too, could become disturbing. Visions of death, fire, falling, or the devil were taken seriously. If a person dreamed of drowning, it might signify spiritual danger. A dream of teeth breaking or hair falling could foretell loss. Some dreams were so troubling that they were confessed to priests or interpreted by wise women, lest their meaning be missed. Children were particularly vulnerable. Night terrors, though unnamed, were recognized. Parents soothed them with lullabies, placed dolls or charms in their beds, and kept candles burning low through the night. In some cases, a priest blessed the child. In others, An old woman from the village might be called to perform a protective chant or place a silver coin under the pillow. For all the reverence medieval people gave to sleep, they also feared its edges. To sleep was to surrender control. To dream was to open the self. And when those experiences turned strange or frightening, they reached instinctively for ritual, for remedy, for meaning. They did not take troubled sleep lightly. It was a message, a warning, a cry from the depths. And whether it came from the body, the mind, or beyond, they listened. And when sleep finally returned, when the nightmare faded, the walker lay still. The soul found calm. They whispered a prayer of thanks, not for dreams fulfilled, but for the return of peace. To sleep in the Middle Ages was not only a physical act, but a moral one. For the medieval mind, the night held not just rest, but risk. The soul, it was believed, was never entirely still, even when the body lay down. And in those dark, silent hours, temptation crept quietly in. Clergy and chroniclers alike warned of the sins that found fertile ground in sleep. Sloth, lust, gluttony, and the weakening of spiritual vigilance. The darkness outside was mirrored by shadows within, and many believed that the sleeping mind was especially vulnerable to the devil's whispers. The most commonly admonished nighttime sin was sloth, known in Latin as acedia. More than simple, laziness, sloth in the medieval view, was a kind of spiritual apathy, a turning away from one's duties and divine purpose. To sleep too much, to sleep at the wrong hours, or to lie abed after dawn was seen not merely as idleness, but as moral decay. Monks, in particular, were cautioned against excessive sleep. The rule of St. Benedict prescribed exact hours for rising and resting. Rising late, even by moments, was considered a breach of discipline and spiritual alertness. Monastic texts warned that the devil enters through drowsiness. Sleep was to be embraced, but only as much as was needed, and never at the cost of devotion. Among lay people, sloth was also discouraged, particularly among the young and unmarried. Parents often rouse children early not only for work, but to instill virtue. Proverbs such as "idle hands are the devil's tools," and "he who sleeps after the sun shall beg before night" carried serious moral weight. But sloth was not the only danger. The night was thought to stir lust, one of the most feared and punished of sins. Dreams of a sexual nature were seen as deeply troubling. It was believed that demons, known as incubi and succubi, could visit sleepers to arouse and corrupt them. These spirits were said to slip into the bedchamber unseen, taking human form, or seductive shapes to tempt the flesh. A man who awoke disturbed from such a dream might confess immediately, fearing that he had sinned in sleep. A woman might be accused of harboring secret desire, even if no action had been taken. The boundary between dream and deed was not always clear, but the moral weight remained. Clergy often warned against sleeping unclothed or without prayers, as this left one naked to the spirit world. Virginity and chastity, especially prized among religious orders, were thought to be especially at risk in sleep. Young novices were instructed to bind themselves modestly, to avoid lingering thoughts before bed, and to sleep on firm surfaces, to reduce temptation. Gluttony, too, was linked with troubled sleep. To eat too heavily before bed was seen not only as harmful to the body, but to the soul. It was said to lead to disturbed dreams, impure thoughts, and restless tossing. Saint Jerome warned that those who filled their bellies too late would find their hearts weighed down in prayer. In noble courts, where feasting could last until nightfall, spiritual advisors sometimes cautioned against overindulgence. Late night, wine, rich meats, and spice sweets were said to dull the mind and weaken resistance to vice. Temperance, even in sleep, was preached as a path to moral clarity. Dreams themselves were a battleground. Some believed that sin could be committed in sleep, not in the legal sense, but in the spiritual one. If a person dreamt of theft, murder, or blasphemy, and took delight in it even within the dream, it was considered an expression of inner vice. confession might be required, penances assigned, and prayers offered for protection against such visions. Other dreamers feared pride, a sin that could manifest as dreams of greatness, adoration, or divine favor. A monk dreaming that he was made bishop, or a woman who dreamt of angels lifting her above others, might be rebuked for vanity. Humility, even in sleep, was the ideal. The idea of vigilance became a spiritual metaphor. To be awake was to be alert in faith. To sleep without discipline was to fall into sin. Preachers invoked Christ's words in Gethsemane, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?" reminding the faithful that to stay awake in mind and spirit was a sacred calling. In sermons, sleep was often likened to death, and those who died in a state of sin might not wake to salvation. Thus, people were encouraged to confess before bed, to say nightly prayers of repentance, and to commend their soul to God as though each night might be their last. Many feared dying in their sleep, especially without the sacraments. To be found, dead in bed, unshriven, was a terrifying prospect. Death was to be faced with consciousness, confession, and ritual. Night prayers were thus filled with phrases such as, "Deliver us from sudden death," or "Guard my soul if I do not wake." And yet, despite these fears, the night also offered a chance for redemption, to lie quietly in bed and reflect upon the day's sins, to whisper a heartfelt confession, to cry silently into a pillow while asking for mercy. These were forms of private penance. The stillness of night allowed the soul to speak more honestly than it could by daylight. Mothers taught children to pray not only for safety, but for forgiveness. Husbands turned over in bed and breathed a silent apology to God. Widows clutched rosaries beneath the covers, mourning not just their loss but their own faults. The bed became, in many homes, an altar of humility. There were also writings that consoled. Books of hours, kept in both noble and merchant homes, included bedtime prayers and reflections. These guided the reader to seek not only sleep, but peace of conscience. "Lay down in peace and sleep," wrote one scribe, "for thou, O Lord, makest me dwell in safety." In these words, moral vigilance was balanced with grace. And so, the medieval night was a quiet trial. It tested one's virtues, stirred one's shadows, and reminded the faithful that sleep was not an escape from sin, but part of the soul's long journey. The darkness did not hide transgressions. It illuminated them in new ways. In dreams, desires surfaced. In silence, the heart spoke. But so too did forgiveness. Each night, no matter how burdened, offered a chance to begin again, to whisper a prayer, to turn toward grace, to sleep not in fear, but in hope. For though temptation crept in with the shadows, so too did mercy, as soft and steady as the breath of those who dared to rest with open hearts. There is a sacred stillness in the first light of morning, and in the medieval world, that stillness was gently revered. To rise from sleep was not a careless act. It was a renewal, a daily resurrection of the body and the spirit. In the hush, before labor, before the clang of tools or the calls of livestock, there was ritual, quiet intention, and deep-rooted rhythm. The day began not with alarm bells, but with bells of prayer. In monastic life, the first tolling marked the hour of lauds, often just before sunrise. Monks, already practiced in breaking sleep during the night for matins, would stir once more. They rose quietly from their simple beds, dressed in layers against the morning chill, and gathered in the chapel for chants that echoed through the stone. Laudate Dominum, praise the Lord. These morning songs, sung in Latin, lifted the mind upward. They were designed not only to worship, but to awaken the soul. The candlelight, the soft rustle of robes, the breath turned into sacred verse, all contributed to a sense of profound calm and focus. Outside the cloister, peasants awoke to other sounds. The cock's crow, persistent and ancient, was nature's summons. The light that filtered through horn-paned windows or under door cracks stirred sleepers into movement. In summer, they might rise before dawn. In winter, just after. The first moments of waking were often spent in quiet. Many crossed themselves, before even sitting up, offering thanks for waking alive. It was a small but powerful ritual, a reminder of mortality and mercy. Some whispered prayers learned from childhood, committing the day ahead to God's keeping. Bless this morning, O Lord, and guide my hands. Children learned these habits early. Mothers whispered them softly as they helped little ones out of their shared beds. Fathers murmured them while pulling on rough woolen tunics. In each gesture was both reverence and routine. Washing came next. Water, drawn the night before or fetched from nearby wells, was poured into wooden or metal basins. The face, hands, and sometimes feet were rinsed. This was not only for cleanliness, but symbolic. A washing away of dreams, of sleep, of yesterday's burdens. In religious households, holy water might be used. For the poor, even a cold splash from a rain barrel held significance. In noble homes, servants brought warmed water and towels. Wealthier families might even have small mirrors, polished metal or glass, to inspect their appearance. But even here, the act of morning washing was more spiritual than cosmetic. It was about preparing the self, not just to be seen, but to serve. Morning dress varied with station. Peasants donned the same clothes they had worn the day before. Sturdy tunics, woolen leggings, aprons for women. These were practical garments, suited for labour, often patched but clean. Shoes were seldom worn indoors, but slipped on before stepping out into mud or frost. Nobles chose from garments laid out by attendants. Layers of linen, wool, and, in winter, fur-lined cloaks. Jewellery and adornments came later in the day. Mornings were for simplicity. In both classes, the donning of clothing was quiet, deliberate. It marked a return to the world of the waking. After. Dressing came the tending of the fire. In every home, the hearth was the heart. Embers from the night were uncovered, coaxed into flame with straw and breath. The fire warmed the room, heated water, and drove out lingering damp. It signaled the true start of day. Without fire, no food could be made, no warmth offered. The morning meal, or breaking of the fast, was modest. For peasants, it was often bread and ale, perhaps with a bit of cheese or leftover pottage if available. In some households, only the children or the elderly ate first. Others shared in silence before dispersing to their chores. In noble homes, the morning meal might include porridge, fruit, and meat, but it too was typically subdued. The grander feasting came later. The morning was for clarity, for calm. Too heavy a meal could dull the mind, and for those with duties in governance or religion, the early hours were considered most sacred. Morning also brought tasks and tidying. Beds were shaken out and covered, floors swept with brooms of straw, animals were fed, tools prepared, letters and messages reviewed. For women, it was the hour of organisation, assigning duties to servants, preparing wool for spinning, or beginning work on embroidery or herbal mixtures. Children, if not already outside, were dressed and set to their early lessons, reciting prayers, learning letters, or helping in small chores. The hum of voices began to rise as the village stirred. Blacksmiths lit forges, bakers opened ovens, the road dusted with footprints. In towns, merchants rolled open shutters, shopkeepers laid out goods. The town crier announced edicts or news. Morning markets bustled early, especially on holy days. But even here, there was a rhythm of gentleness. The first hours were unhurried, before the pace of the day took hold. For some, mornings meant movement. Travellers set off at dawn. Pilgrims began their long walk after sleeping in fields or inns. Soldiers on the march checked gear, saddled horses, and took quiet breakfast before the day's orders came. The roads were safest in early light, and so much of the world was in motion before the sun rose fully. Morning also brought reflection. For those who had dreamt it was time to ponder meaning, was the dream a message, a warning, a hope? Some consulted, elders or clergy. Others simply whispered their thoughts to the fire. In this light, the night's visions felt both distant and revealing. And then the bells rang once more. Whether from a church tower, a monastery, or a wayside chapel, the call to prime, the first hour of the workday, rang out across fields and cities. With it came commitment to labor, to virtue, to the unfolding of time. In this way, the medieval morning was a kind of rebirth. It cleansed, clothed, and called forth the soul. It acknowledged the body's rest, the mind's dreaming, and gently reassembled both into a living presence. Morning was not a rush, it was a passage, and those who walked it with care found themselves steadied for the trials and triumphs to come. The return of light was a grace, soft, slow, and full of promise, a reminder that no matter the shadows of the night, the world would rise again, and with it, so would they. In a world shaped by the rhythms of religion and harvest, the medieval calendar pulsed with festivals, moments when the burdens of daily labor lifted, when community gathered in joy or solemnity, and when time itself seemed to bend. Amid dancing, prayer, and feasting, there also came a gentler transformation: the way people slept. Sleep during holy days was different. It came after long vigils, beneath the echo of hymns, or amidst the quiet exhaustion of celebration. It carried dreams shaped by ritual, prayers offered in candlelight, and stories shared around village fires. These were not ordinary nights, and the sleep they held was touched by something greater. The church year was a map of sacred time. Major feasts like Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and All Saints' Day marked not only liturgical turning points, but shifts in daily life. On these days, and the nights that preceded them, people adjusted their routines. They stayed up later, rose earlier, ate differently, and entered into a slower, more reflective rhythm. The vigil, held on the eve of many feast days, often involved late-night services. In towns and cities, churches filled with flickering candles. Monks and parishioners chanted psalms through the hours, sometimes until midnight. The faithful knelt or stood, swaying gently with the chants, eyes half closed, caught between worship and drowsiness. After such vigils, sleep came with a rare sweetness. It was not rushed, not burdened by guilt or toil. It was sanctified, earned by devotion, warmed by the company of fellow believers. Many people spoke of dreaming more clearly on feast nights, of seeing saints, hearing hymns in sleep, or waking with a sense of renewal. Christmas Eve was one of the most beloved and spiritually charged nights. In noble homes and peasant huts alike, families gathered around the hearth to share food and songs. The Yule log burned bright, casting shadows on timber beams. Children listened wide-eyed to stories of the Christ child, of midnight miracles, of angels walking unseen among them. It was said that on Christmas Eve, animals could speak at midnight, and that oxen knelt in barns in reverence. Some believed the boundary between heaven and earth grew thinner, and that dreams on this night were gifts from God. People went to bed with full hearts, stomachs warm with spiced drinks, and minds softened by mystery. Their sleep that night was deep, comforted by carols still echoing in memory. Easter, by contrast, brought the sleep of release. After the long fasting and discipline of Lent, 40 days of spiritual and bodily restraint, Easter came with celebration. Bells rang, candles were lit from new fire. The joy of resurrection filled churches and fields alike. Many communities held all-night vigils before Easter morning, keeping the dark at bay with psalms and prayers. By the time Mass ended, the sun was rising, and people returned home to rest. This post-vigil sleep was like no other, a collapse into grace. It carried the soul from darkness to light, from fear to forgiveness. Feasts were not only sacred, they were social. On saints' days or village festivals, people danced long into the night. Fiddles played, ale flowed, children fell asleep on their mothers' laps or wrapped in blankets beneath the stars. Laughter rang through barns and halls, and sleep arrived not in solitude, but amid warmth, story, and song. In these communal moments, the boundaries of the self softened. Dreams were shared. People recounted them by firelight or at morning meal. A farmer might tell of a dream in which Saint Isidore walked his fields. A baker might dream of bread that never burned. These tales were told with reverence, humour, or curiosity, but always with belief that something sacred stirred behind the veil of sleep. Certain festivals were especially tied to dreams. All Hallows Eve, now known as Halloween, was one such night. It was believed that on this eve, the souls of the dead returned, walking unseen among the living. People left candles burning in windows to guide spirits. They set extra places at the table, and they paid close attention to their dreams. To dream of a loved one on this night was seen as a visitation, a message, a comfort, or sometimes a warning. People woke in the morning speaking softly of who they'd seen. A father long gone, a child lost to fever, a grandmother who had died peacefully with the rosary still in her hands. Such dreams were met with quiet acceptance, folded into the larger rhythm of faith. The days of Carnival, just before Lent, brought another kind of sleep. These were wild days filled with masks, games, indulgence. People drank deeply, ate heavily, and danced until exhaustion. When sleep finally came, it was unrestrained, sometimes chaotic. Yet even this was part of the cycle. After excess came reflection. After revelry, repentance. And so the dreams that followed were not dismissed. They were seen as part of the soul's journey. Feast day sleep, for those who worked the land, also meant rest from labour. Manorial lords were expected to grant peasants time off on major holy days. Fields went untended. Tools lay idle. The body, worn by months of work, welcomed the pause. People took longer naps. Children dozed in the sun. Grandparents rested beneath trees while bells chimed from distant chapels. Even the animals seemed to move more slowly. In monasteries, feast days brought changes to the sleep schedule. Monks, who normally rose at midnight, might be allowed extra rest. The divine office was abbreviated or sung with more joy. Meals were larger. Candles burned longer. The air itself seemed fuller, more forgiving. There was also a sense that heaven joined the earth in rest. On these special nights, dreams were not burdens to be analysed, but blessings to be received. People woke not with anxiety, but with a soft smile, recalling stars in their sleep, or music drifting just beyond hearing. In all of this, one truth remained. Sleep during festivals was not simply about the body recovering. It was about the spirit receiving joy, presence, vision, memory. It was the soul's participation in the holy rhythm of the year. And when the festival passed, when morning rose again on ordinary time, people returned to work with something quiet, folded in their hearts. A warmth remembered, a dream not forgotten, a rest that had touched something deeper. The feast had ended, but the grace of its sleep lingered. There comes a moment, just before dawn, when the world holds its breath, a hush that lingers between the darkness and the coming day. In the Middle Ages, as in all of human history, this tender sliver of time held something sacred, and so too does it now as we reach the close of our journey into the sleep of a world long past. For in sleep, as the medieval mind knew well, one encountered not just dreams, but truths. Sleep was not only a bodily function, it was a mirror of life's deepest rhythms. Rest and wakefulness, forgetting and remembering, darkness and the gentle return of light. It was through sleep that people of the Middle Ages came to understand their own fragility and their strength. They feared the night, yes, but they also honored it. They learned, without modern science or medical certainty, that sleep healed, that a fevered child, after a night of rest, might wake renewed, that a sorrow, when carried into sleep, could soften by morning, that the soul, when untangled from the noise of day, could hear itself again in dreams. They also believed that sleep revealed the soul. Dreams were not random. They were doorways, messages, warnings, echoes of sins left unconfessed or blessings, not yet seen. To dream of water, of fire, of distant lands, these were not meaningless visions. They were woven into the fabric of understanding, interpreted by monks, mothers, and mystics alike. This deep listening, this reverence for the meaning within sleep, is something we have not lost, though we often hurry past it. In the medieval world, sleep marked the edges of human vulnerability. To lie down was to surrender. To close one's eyes was to trust in God, in family, in the stillness of the home. Sleep was when the body released its grip on control. And yet, in that surrender, people found peace. In that letting go, they touched something timeless. Time itself moved differently then. There were no clocks ticking beside the bed, no glowing screens to disturb the dark. Night fell like a curtain, drawn slowly over the village. It came with the scent of smoke, the rustle of linen, the soft murmur of evening prayer. And morning returned not with buzz or blare, but with birdsong, with the gradual lightening of sky, with the ringing of distant bells calling the soul not to urgency, but to presence. This rhythm, the sun, the stars, the seasons, was not merely background. It was a sacred pulse. It taught patience. It reminded people that not everything need be instant, that rest has its place, that the night is not an absence of life, but a different kind of living. To sleep, then, was not weakness. It was wisdom. It was the recognition that rest is holy, that silence has value, that dreams are not a waste, but a window. The medieval soul knew this deeply. In castles and cottages, barns and cloisters, the people of that age curled into themselves each night, not knowing what the next day would bring. They carried fears of illness, of hunger, of war. They bore joys of family, of faith, of song, and they took all of this into their sleep, trusting it to be cradled, sorted, softened. And when they woke, sometimes in the cold, sometimes to bells, sometimes with aching limbs, they began again, gently, gratefully, because for them, the fact of waking was not guaranteed. Each morning was a gift. Each return from sleep was a resurrection. This perspective, this reverence, remains with us if we pause to feel it. When we close our eyes at night, we echo those before us. We echo the monk folding his hands on rough wool, the child nestling into straw beside siblings, the noblewoman whispering a psalm beneath velvet curtains. We carry their questions. Will I dream tonight? Will I wake? Will peace come? And we carry their rituals, placing something sacred by our bedside, dimming the light with care, breathing deeply before the leap into dreams. In our modern world, where sleep is often sacrificed, interrupted, or dismissed, there is something profoundly healing in remembering this older way, this slower way, this way of honoring the night as more than just an end, but as a beginning of its own. For even now, sleep connects us to something greater than ourselves. It returns us to mystery, to silence, to the unseen workings of heart and mind. And in that quiet descent, we become once more human, not in our tasks, but in our being. The Middle Ages may have passed, but its sleep endures. In the creak of an old bed frame, the scent of lavender on a pillow, the soft flicker of a candle before sleep. And perhaps, when we allow ourselves to slow, to rest, to dream, we meet them again, in dreams where saints still walk, in fields that shimmer with moonlight, in songs sung without words. They are there, asleep beneath oak beams and thatch, beneath cloisters and chapel stones, beside the fire, on the road, in the hush of prayer. And we are with them. The night, after all, belongs to us all, to every age, to every soul that has ever dared to close its eyes and trust the dark. So as we draw this long, quiet journey to a close, may you carry with you the softness of their world, the peace of their pause, the strength of their surrender. And tonight, when you lay your head upon the pillow, whether feathered or firm, scented or simple, may you remember them, the medieval sleeper, and may your dreams be kind,